The doctor was still talking when my mother started crying. Treatment, surgery, clinical trials, survival rates. Words I had heard 100 times during my medical training suddenly sounded like a foreign language. My father sat beside me with both hands locked together between his knees. He was staring at the floor. My mother kept asking questions. What happens next? When can treatment start? Is there another specialist we should talk to? Should we go to Cleveland? The doctor answered each question carefully. I heard every word. But there was only one thought in my head, and I hated myself for it. Thank God. Not because I wanted to die, I didn't. I was 24 years old. I was terrified. But underneath the fear was something else, relief. For the first time in my life, I finally had a reason to stop. 3 months earlier, my alarm went off every morning at 5:15. By 5:30, I was studying. At 6:20, I showered. At 6:45, I ate half a banana while reviewing flashcards. By 7:15, I was driving to my clinical rotation at a hospital outside Columbus. I was in the first year of a physician assistant program. It was a good program, competitive, expensive. Exactly the kind of program my parents had spent years telling people I would get into. My father, David, owned a small HVAC company. He had started working when he was 18. Summer heat, frozen rooftops, flooded basements. Dad had spent almost 40 years fixing other people's problems. Whenever I complained about school, he had one answer. That's why you're getting an education, Em, so you don't have to do what I did. My mother, Susan, worked in medical billing. Mom approached life like a spreadsheet. Every problem had a solution. Bad grade, tutor, college applications, spreadsheet. Anxiety, therapist, trouble sleeping. New mattress, blackout curtains, magnesium supplements. She loved me fiercely. She just didn't know how to sit beside a problem without trying to fix it. And I had become very good at being fixable. I got good grades. I didn't drink much. I never got arrested. Never dropped out. Never brought home a boyfriend I hated. Never called at 2 in the morning asking for money. At family gatherings, Dad would put his hand on my shoulder and say, "This one's going to work in medicine." And everyone would smile. I smiled too. The truth was, I couldn't remember when becoming a physician assistant had become my dream. I only remembered when it became the plan. The first time my stomach hurt badly enough to scare me, I was standing in a hospital supply room. I bent over and pressed my hand against my abdomen. My classmate Jordan looked at me. "You okay?" "Yeah." "You don't look okay. Didn't eat enough this morning." That explanation worked because there was always an explanation. Stress, coffee, no breakfast, too little sleep, too much sleep, my period. Clinical anxiety. For 2 weeks, I explained it away. Then I stopped being hungry. That was harder to ignore. At Sunday dinner, my cousin Nora watched me move a piece of chicken around my plate for almost 20 minutes. Nora was 29 and had been the family cautionary tale for most of her 20s. She'd graduated with a business degree, landed a corporate job, quit 4 years later, and become a photographer. My parents liked Nora. They just didn't understand her. Dad once described her as very talented, just not practical. Nora heard him. She laughed. That was one of the things I loved about her. She didn't seem afraid of disappointing anyone. That night, she pointed at my plate. "You've eaten 3 green beans." "I'm not hungry. You weren't hungry last week either." Mom looked over. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Nora ignored me. "She's been holding her stomach all night." Mom immediately switched into problem-solving mode. "Is it heartburn? I've got omeprazole." "Mom, I'm fine." Nora stared at me. "You need a doctor." I spend 12 hours a day around doctors. That's not what I said. Dad looked up. When are your finals? 2 weeks. He nodded. Get through finals. Then get yourself checked out. Mom hesitated. We could do urgent care tomorrow. I have clinical. Saturday. I have to study. Nora leaned back in her chair. You people hear yourselves, right? Dad frowned. What does that mean? It means she's sick and everyone is checking her calendar. I'm not sick, I said. Nora looked directly at me. You don't know that. I remember getting irritated. I'll deal with it after finals. That ended the conversation. Because in our family, after finals sounded responsible. I didn't make it to finals. 4 days later, I was observing a patient assessment when the room started moving. I grabbed the edge of a counter. A nurse asked if I needed to sit down. I told her no. Then I woke up on the floor. By that evening, I was a patient in the same hospital where I had been training. Blood work became imaging. Imaging became more imaging. Then came a biopsy. My parents arrived before I even had a room. Mom brought my insurance card, a phone charger, clean clothes, and a notebook. Dad brought nothing. He just stood beside my bed looking angry at the universe. 3 days later, we sat across from an oncologist. He told us I had an aggressive cancer. It had already spread farther than they had hoped. There were treatment options. There were specialists, there were trials, there was hope. But there were no guarantees. When Mom finally asked the question nobody wanted to ask, the doctor paused. How long? He wouldn't give us an exact answer. Doctors hate exact answers when bodies are involved. But eventually he said that without a strong response to treatment, we might be talking about months rather than years, maybe 6, maybe more, maybe less. Mom broke down. Dad stared at the floor, and I felt relieved. That night, I lay awake in my hospital bed, thinking about what kind of monster feels relieved after being told she might die. Then I realized why. There would be no exam next week. No clinical evaluation, no applications, no 5-year plan. Nobody could ask me where I saw myself at 30. For the first time since I was a child, my future wasn't an assignment, and I could finally rest without feeling guilty. Cancer changed my parents overnight. Mom created a binder. Of course she did. Doctors, medications, insurance, diet, appointments. Questions. She joined 3 online support groups and called 2 cancer centers before breakfast. Dad started calling people he hadn't spoken to in years. A customer knew a surgeon. A supplier's wife knew an oncologist. Someone's brother had survived something almost exactly like this, although it wasn't remotely the same. They were doing everything they knew how to do, and I loved them for it. But sometimes I wanted someone to sit beside me and say, "This is awful," and stood I got. "We're going to beat this. You have to stay positive. We found another doctor." "Have you eaten?" "What did the nurse say?" One afternoon, Mom arrived carrying a cardboard box. "I found this in Grandpa's things. My grandfather Walter had died 2 years earlier. He had been Mom's father and the only person in our family who seemed completely unimpressed by achievement. When I got accepted into college, everyone asked about my major. Grandpa asked whether my dorm had good trees outside. When I made the dean's list, everyone congratulated me. Grandpa asked whether I'd made any friends. When I told him I was applying to PA programs, he said, "Is that what you want?" I remember laughing, of course. He looked at me for a long moment, then he said, "That wasn't my question." I never forgot it. I also never answered him. Mom put the box on my bed. Inside were photographs, an old pocket watch, postcards, and a stack of notebooks. At the bottom was an envelope. My name was written across the front. Underneath it, for Emily, when she finally has time. I laughed. Then I cried before I even opened it. The letter was short. Grandpa wrote that he'd spent most of his life believing there would always be more time. More time to travel, more time to call someone, more time to sit outside, more time to do something foolish. Then, near the bottom, he'd written, "Don't spend so much time building a good life that you forget to live one." I read that sentence until the words blurred. A few days later, I went through an old notebook from high school. Most of it was chemistry formulas and college application notes. Then I found a page I'd forgotten. At the top, 16-year-old me had written, "Things I'll do someday. See the Pacific Ocean, learn pottery, sleep somewhere under the stars, take a train without caring where it ends, go dancing even though I'm terrible at it, see one of Nora's photography exhibits, eat breakfast at midnight." There were 14 things. Then I reached the last one. I stopped breathing for a second. Tell Dad I don't want to work in medicine. I'd written it 7 years earlier. I closed the notebook, then opened it again. The words were still there. My first round of treatment was brutal. I lost weight. Food tasted wrong. My joints hurt. Some mornings I couldn't walk from my bed to the bathroom without stopping. Then slowly I had a stretch of better days. Not healthy days, better days. My doctor told me I had a few weeks before the next phase of treatment. Mom immediately started talking about nutrition and recovery. I interrupted her. "I want to go somewhere." She blinked. "Where?" "I don't know." Dad looked concerned. "You just got out of treatment." "I know. We can take you somewhere," Mom said. "Maybe a cabin, somewhere close. I want to go with Nora." Silence. Mom looked hurt. Dad looked confused. "Why Nora?" "Because I want to." It sounded childish, but saying it felt revolutionary. Mom started to object. I said, "No." Everyone stopped. I don't think I'd ever said it to them like that before. Not angrily, not apologetically, just no. Nora picked me up 3 days later. She had an old Subaru, 2 cameras, and absolutely no itinerary. Mom hated all 3 things. At the curb, she hugged me for almost a full minute. "Call every night." "I will." "Take your medication." "I will." "Don't push yourself." "I won't." Dad handed Nora his credit card. She handed it back. "I've got her." He didn't like that answer. I did. We drove west, Colorado first, then Utah, then Nevada. Finally, California. It wasn't glamorous. Some days I felt awful. Once, Nora had to pull over because I threw up beside a gas station dumpster. Another day, I slept for 13 hours and missed everything we'd planned. But for the first time in my life, missing the plan didn't feel like failure. We ate pancakes at 12:47 in the morning in a diner outside Denver. I sang karaoke in a bar with 9 people watching. I was terrible. Nobody cared. I bought a disposable camera, even though Nora told me it was photographic malpractice. We slept one night in a cabin where I could see stars through the window above my bed. And eventually I saw the Pacific Ocean. I stood on the beach wearing a sweater and a knit hat, even though it wasn't cold enough for one. The treatment had taken most of my hair. Nora stood a few feet behind me. "You can cross it off." "What? The list?" I smiled. "Yeah." We watched the water. After a while, she asked, "What would you be doing right now if you hadn't gotten sick?" I knew immediately, studying. "No, I mean with your life." I looked at her. I'd finish the program, then get certified, then find a job, then pay off loans, then she kept going until I laughed. "I don't know, Nora." She didn't laugh. "Would you have been happy?" The ocean was loud enough that I could have pretended not to hear her. Instead, I said, "I don't know." Nora nodded. "That's not the same as yes." When I came home, treatment started again, and reality came with it. One morning, Dad walked into my room holding an envelope. It was from my PA program. He had opened it by accident. At least that's what he said. What's this? I knew immediately. I withdrew. His face changed. You what? I withdrew from the program. Temporarily? No. He stared at me. Emily, you don't know what's going to happen. Exactly. So why would you make a permanent decision now? Because I don't want to go back. You're scared. No. Of course you're scared. Anybody would be. Dad. What happens if treatment works? I felt something tighten inside me. Then I'll figure it out. You don't throw away your future because you're scared. My future? Yes, your future. You worked for years for this, I know. We worked for years for this. There it was. He regretted it the moment he said it. But it was already in the room. I looked at him. How much? What? How much did it cost? Emily, that's not what I meant. Tutors, applications, tuition, rent, everything. Give me a number. Stop. Because I've been keeping track too. His face softened. I know what you gave up. We're your parents. That's what parents do. And I've spent my entire life trying to pay you back. You don't owe us anything. I laughed. It came out harsher than I intended. Then why does quitting feel like stealing from you? Dad went silent. Mom appeared in the doorway. Neither of us had heard her come upstairs. I started crying. I hated crying during arguments. It made me feel like I was losing. I had to get cancer before you thought I was allowed to take a break. Mom covered her mouth. Dad looked like I'd hit him. Everything we did was for you. I know. That was the worst part. I wiped my face. I know, Dad. That's what made it so hard to say no. He didn't speak to me much that night. The next afternoon, Nora came over. We sat on the back porch. I heard about Uncle David. Mom called you? Your mom calls everybody. I smiled. Then Nora said, you know he knows, right? Knows what? That feeling. I looked at her. She hesitated. I probably shouldn't tell you this. That's never stopped you before. When your dad was 18, he got into art school. I laughed because I genuinely thought she was joking. My dad. Your dad. He can't draw. Nora gave me a look. Oh, Emily. She pulled out her phone. A few seconds later, she showed me a photograph. It was an old pencil drawing of a woman sitting at a kitchen table. The detail was incredible. Dad drew that. Grandma has a bunch of them. I stared at the screen. What happened? Your grandfather told him art wasn't a career. Dad had rarely talked about his father. I knew they had worked together. I knew Grandpa Carter had been strict. That was about it. He didn't go. Nora shook her head. He took a job instead. Then he met your mom. Then you happened. Then the business happened. I looked through the photographs, landscapes, faces, buildings, hands. My father's hands had spent 40 years repairing air conditioners. I had never once imagined them holding a pencil. Nora put her phone away. Maybe he wasn't trying to turn you into himself. What does that mean? Maybe he was trying to make sure you never had to become him. I found Dad in the garage that evening. He was pretending to organize tools. I sat on a stool. Nora told me about art school. His hands stopped moving. She shouldn't have. Were you good? He shrugged. Doesn't matter. It matters to me. He put down the wrench. I was 18. Why didn't you go? You know why? No, I know what Nora thinks. He leaned against the workbench. My dad thought I needed something reliable. He wasn't wrong. Were you happy? Dad smiled without humor. You sound like your grandfather. That's not an answer. He looked at me. No. It was the first time I'd ever heard my father say that about his life. Not that he hated Mom. Not that he hated me. Not that he hated his business. Just that there had been another life he had wanted once. Were you happy? Dad smiled without humor. You sound like your grandfather. That's not an answer. He looked at me. No. It was the first time I'd ever heard my father say that about his life. Not that he hated Mom. Not that he hated me. Not that he hated his business. Just that there had been another life he had wanted once. I went upstairs and brought down the old notebook. I opened it to the list, then handed it to him. He read slowly. When he reached the final line, his face changed. Tell Dad I don't want to work in medicine. He sat down. How long have you known? Since I was 17. Why didn't you tell me? I had imagined answering that question for years. In every imaginary version, I was angry. In reality, I was just tired. Because disappointing you scared me more than disappointing myself. Dad stared at the notebook. Then he started crying. I'd seen my father cry twice before, at his mother's funeral. And when the oncologist told him I might die. This was different. I thought I was helping you. I know. I thought if you had a career, money, something solid, you'd never have to be afraid. I know. He rubbed both hands over his face. I don't know when being afraid for you turned into deciding for you. Neither did I, but for the first time, I didn't need him to fix it. I just needed him to understand it. The next morning, Dad knocked on my bedroom door carrying a plastic storage bin. Inside were sketchbooks, dozens of them. Most hadn't been opened in decades. We sat on the floor together. I turned the pages slowly. Portraits, old houses. A gas station. My mother when she was 21. Dad. What? You were good? He stared at the page, then said quietly. I know. I laughed. So did he. It might have been the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Treatment didn't magically fix everything. This isn't that kind of story. Some scans were better, others weren't. Doctors changed medications. There were weeks when I felt almost normal. There were weeks when getting dressed felt like climbing a mountain, but 6 months passed, then 8, then 10. I was still here. I didn't go back to PA school. For a while, that terrified me. When someone asked what I did, I didn't know what to say. I'd spent my entire life answering that question with the next achievement. Then Nora started teaching me photography. At first, I was awful. My pictures were crooked. I overexposed everything. I kept trying to follow rules. Nora finally took the camera away from me. You know your problem? I have cancer? Besides that, I laughed. You're trying to get an A in photography? That sounded so much like me that I couldn't argue. Eventually, I started recording short interviews too. Nothing big. A retired teacher who had moved across the country at 70. A woman rebuilding her life after divorce. A man learning to cook after his wife died. People whose lives had changed without asking permission first. I liked listening to them, maybe because, for once, I wasn't trying to solve anything. I was just listening. A year after the day the oncologist told my parents I might have 6 months, Dad came to my apartment. He was carrying an envelope. What's this? Open it. Inside was a brochure from a community college. Evening drawing, Tuesdays, 6:30 p.m. I looked up. You signed me up for an art class? Dad frowned. No, I looked at the registration page. Then I saw the name, David Carter. I stared at him. You're going? He shoved his hands into his pockets. Starts Tuesday. I couldn't stop smiling. What made you do that? He shrugged. I had this annoying 24-year-old tell me something about wasting your life doing what everyone expects. I don't remember saying that. Must have been somebody else. I handed him the brochure. You nervous? Terrified? Good. Why is that good? Because now you can't tell me being scared is a reason not to do something. He pointed at me. I liked you better before you learned boundaries. No, you didn't. He thought about it, then smiled. No. He sat beside me. I didn't. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then Dad looked down at the brochure. Think I'm too old? There was a time when I would have answered with statistics. People change careers at 50. Brain plasticity continues throughout adulthood. Creative hobbies improve well-being. I would have tried to prove something. Instead, I thought about Grandpa's letter, the Pacific Ocean, midnight pancakes, my old notebook, my father's drawing sitting in a plastic box for almost 40 years, and all the years both of us had spent waiting for permission. No, Dad. He looked at me. I think you still have time. I used to think getting sick stole my future. Maybe it did. At least the future I had planned. I never finished PS school. I never became the person my parents used to describe at family dinners. And I still don't know how much time I have. My doctors don't know either. Cancer taught me there are questions nobody can answer. But somewhere between hospital rooms, motel breakfasts, my grandfather's letter, the Pacific Ocean, and my father's first drawing in almost 40 years, I finally understood something. A future isn't valuable because it's long. It's valuable because it's yours. My parents loved me. They always had. But for years, their fear became expectations. Their sacrifices became plans. And their plans became a life I was too afraid to refuse. I helped them do it. Every time I said, I'm fine. Every time I said, whatever you think is best. Every time I postponed what I wanted until someday, I don't blame them for everything anymore. And I don't blame myself either. We're learning. Dad has been taking that drawing class for 3 months now. He's still running his HVAC business. But every Tuesday at 6, he closes early. Mom complained about it exactly once. Then she bought him a new set of pencils. Last week, he showed me his latest drawing. It was a woman standing on a beach. Her back was turned. She was looking out at the ocean. She wore a knit hat. I knew immediately who it was. You made me too skinny, I told him. Artistic license. And my shoulders don't look like that. More artistic license. I studied it for a while. Then I noticed something in the corner. Tiny handwriting. Dad had written a title. Emily, finally. I looked at him. Finally what? Dad smiled. That's for you to decide. For 24 years, I thought my life would begin once I became the person everyone expected me to be. I was wrong. My life began the day I finally stopped asking for permission to live it.